Hello creative friends, I'm Anastasia and welcome back to my channel. It's officially the holiday season and I'm so excited to share with you these super simple and beautiful Christmas decor DIYs. I'll show you how easy it is to create your own holiday decor that looks high-end without spending a ton. And I'll show you how I style them around my house so you can get inspired for your holiday decorating. Let's go! I was looking through Dollar Tree's new Christmas stuff this year and I found this tall metal deer for $6 that had so much potential. It already had a nice gold color brushed over a dark background, but I didn't like that the inside of its legs and antlers weren't painted at all because it actually made it look cheap, which I'm definitely trying to avoid. My tried and true solution is always rub and buff. I use the European gold because I like that it's not too bright or too warm. I like the brushed finish that it already has, so I want to keep that style when I go over it with the rub and buff. So I'm using a little paintbrush to fill in all those inside areas that weren't painted before. And it's already looking a million times better. So I'm taking a piece of balled up tissue paper with the rub and buff on it and I'm imitating that brushed on pattern all over with these swiping type motions back and forth and kind of sporadic movements. I really like how this method turned out because you can still see the original gold and the dark background underneath, so it's creating a lot of dimension in the color. I'm styling it here on my console table with this pine garland that I thrifted, as well as a bowl of pine cones from my yard. I added some of this velvet burgundy ribbon around its neck and now I have a piece that looks high-end but was only $6. I almost overlooked this precious little ceramic deer statue at the thrift store. It was only $1, so I thought I'd go ahead and grab it to give it a makeover. First, I'm cleaning it off with some rubbing alcohol. And since it has this super glossy glaze on it, I'm priming it with this Rust-Oleum Universal Bonding Primer so my paint sticks. Once that's dry, I'm giving it a base coat of this matte coffee bean color spray paint, which is one of my favorite base colors to use underneath rub and buff. Now I know I share a lot on my channel about how I make over my thrifted items using rub and buff, but today I want to try a new application method to see what kind of look it creates. You saw me do this a little bit with a standing deer, so I'm just going to ball up some tissue paper, which is going to act as our applicator. Now because of the crinkly texture, it's creating this really cool pattern with the gold. It's very buildable too if you want more coverage than it's providing. I ended up doing about 2 coats total to get the look that I wanted. To add more dimension, I did some sporadic swiping motions to get some brushed on texture. It's so hard to believe that this is the same bright gold deer from the thrift store. Now it truly looks like an aged solid brass piece. In the patterned pillow world, I think block print has to be my favorite style. And lucky for us DIYers, it is super easy to block print your own fabric as long as you have a stamp. I usually like to look through the stamp section at Hobby Lobby. They have a really good selection and I like that I can just buy an individual stamp for a few dollars rather than buying a whole pack. They have several Christmas stamps in their year-round section, but they also have a Christmas collection out now as well. You should always test out your stamp on a piece of scrap fabric first. In my case, this helped me realize that the details of my stamp were just not coming through onto the fabric because my stamp just had too many fine details. And the acrylic paint and the textured fabric were making all those details get lost. So I went back to Hobby Lobby and found this stamp. You can see that it has much less tiny details and the grooves around the details are really defined, so the paint won't get caked up in there and mess up the design. So make sure you look for that when you're picking your stamp. Now let's get going on this project. You'll need a plain throw pillowcase. You can buy them off of Amazon or find them at the thrift store. Hobby Lobby has some canvas cases, but there's a limited selection. I needed mine in a hurry, so I just sewed this one up with some scrap fabric from a yard sale. I always put a board inside my pillowcase to give me a flat surface to stamp on. We are kind of creating our own ink pad with acrylic paint. So I'm putting some of this forest green on my plate and brushing it into a thin layer. Then I'll stamp right into that. The fun part about block print is that the design options are literally endless. I'm making a vertical stripe pattern and I'm just eyeballing it. You can definitely use a ruler or a washable fabric marker to mark your lines if you want them to be more perfect. It does take an hour or two depending on the size of your pillow, but it's pretty relaxing to do and I just like to put a movie on and go for it. I wanted to add a little holiday flair, so I'm using a toothpick to add some red dots to look like berries. Once the paint dries, I'm throwing the case in the dryer on a high heat for about 5 minutes, which will just really set in the paint. I love that it turned out very low-key holiday, so I can have this out all through the winter and not just during Christmas. Keep in mind you can use the same techniques to make so many different things, even table runners for your holiday tablescapes. For several years now, this style of rustic aged bells have been very popular for Christmas decor. They usually come in these clusters tied together with twine or rope and add a beautiful old world look to really any style of Christmas decor. It seems like something that would be a fun DIY challenge, so I could have a budget-friendly way to make a lot of these for my house. I found these little party favor buckets at Goodwill and paid $2 for both packs. I thought they had the perfect tapered bell shape when turned upside down. So first we're just going to remove that handle and set it to the side because we will need it later. And these are made out of really thin metal, so I'm using some pliers to bend these pieces inwards so that they lay flat inside the bucket. I also want to point out that these can be made out of many different objects like cups, cans, jars, really anything that has that bell-like shape. I picked up these small styrofoam balls from Dollar Tree, and the most important part is that the diameter of them can be cut to fit the size of the top of your bell. I found that if I just needed to shave off a tiny bit of the diameter, I could use my thumb to break off a little bit at a time to make it just the right size. Now I'm going to attach that rounded styrofoam piece to the top of the bucket. Well, technically the bottom. I don't want this to budge, so I'm using lots of hot glue in the middle and around the edges. Instead of the styrofoam balls, if you don't want that texture, I think this would also work with the bottom half of a plastic Easter egg. Now this is where we will need to grab those bucket handles. These are also super easy to bend, so I'm using a mop handle as my guide to bend those into a circle and then using pliers to straighten out those bent pieces on the ends until I get something that looks like this. This will become the handle of our bell, so I'm using that to create a hole in the center of the styrofoam, and I'm kind of creating a bigger hole so that I have room to fill that up with hot glue so it is really secure. Once the handle is set in place with the hot glue, I'm adding a little more hot glue on top to make it flush with the styrofoam around it. A cool little hot glue gun tip that I just learned from Rural Refurb's channel is that when your hot glue stick gets short and you need to put in a new one, but you'd have to hold it with your hand, you can instead melt the end of your glue stick and stick it right onto the back of the old one. That's pretty genius of her. At this point, I am spray painting them black, starting with the inside. To spray paint the outside, it worked really well to put them on a dowel so I could hang them between two paint buckets and have a 360 spray range while the inside can still dry. I really thought that spray painting was the only base coat that I would need to do, but I realized that there's just too much texture difference between the styrofoam and the bucket. So I decided to add some texture to the bucket to make it all look more seamless. My favorite way to create an aged metal look is by mixing paint and baking soda. I'm using black acrylic paint and enough baking soda to give it a yogurt consistency. Then I'm taking a damp paper towel and stippling that all over, and it's already giving the bucket a similar texture as the styrofoam. I love using this technique with black paint because it really gives it almost a cast iron texture. After a while, some bits of paper towel were coming off into the paint, and it was kind of giving this really awesome, thicker texture in some areas that gave it even more of a rustic metal look. This is after it has dried, and you can tell that the styrofoam ball is looking like the surface of the moon. So I'm taking that same paint baking soda mixture and filling in a lot of that texture on the styrofoam. You can tell the difference here between one that I've done on the right and one that I haven't done on the left. I actually found that this method was much easier to do with my finger. For this next part, we will be adding our gold. Feel free to make them any color that makes you happy. Gold just makes me happy. So you can use Rub and Buff, which I do typically use, but I wanted to try out this metallic gold acrylic paint in the color 14 karat gold. Now the gold is on and I want to add more of an aged rustic look, so I'm using this coffee bean color paint on a sponge and doing a very light sweep of it across the bell. I'm letting it be heavier in some areas and lighter in most areas. This will also add lots of dimension in the color as authentic aged bells have. It's providing a patinaed look and is almost giving it a slightly rusted look, which I'm really loving. And of course, if you put too much on, you can always go back over with the gold in any areas as needed. Back to the dowels we go, and I'm giving them a coat of matte clear spray to seal this all in so that they last for a long time. Now the last step is to string them all together. So I've laid them on the floor in the kind of cluster shape that I want them to have when they're hanging up. I started off by tying a piece of twine to the top bell to give me a guide for the length of twine that I'll need for the rest. Going to the next bell, I'm putting the twine through the handle and cutting it so the twine is even with the twine of the top bell. Then I'm tying a knot right at the base to keep it in place. And I'm doing the same thing with the rest of the bells, just threading that twine through and cutting it where it's even with the other twine at the top. I'm also picking them up periodically to make sure that I still like the way that they're hanging. Now we need to make a loop at the top, so I'm gathering all the twine and folding it over to make a loop, then using some super glue to secure it together. Next, I'm wrapping some twine around that super glued area. Then I trimmed off the excess, and this all gave it a really clean, finished look. I'm using a bread tie to attach this right to the central spine of my garland. I also picked up this beautiful deep burgundy velvet ribbon from Amazon. It is a really beautiful color if you aren't looking for a true red, and it's a really good price, so I will link it in my description. I tied a little bow, and I'm also attaching that with a bread tie. These definitely give the same effect that the ones sold in retail have, but mine cost less than $10 in materials to make the whole cluster. I hope you gained some inspiration from this video and that you'll try out some of these projects for your own holiday decorating. I'd love to know in the comments what your favorite DIY was today. Thank you all so much for watching. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you soon in the next one. Bye guys!